Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being the show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Snowpiercer, a great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I'm going to let you know I've actually never seen the movie that this is based on and or the comic book that this is based on. I've always been aware of the movie, I've just never seen it. I just kind of made a conscious choice not to watch the movie more recently because I was like, oh, the TV show's coming out, so, I only recently found out, like a couple weeks ago, that this is actually based on a comic book. Regardless, it's like a French comic book from the 80s, I think, is when it originally started. Whatever the case may be, tangents and all that. So this is, like I said, my first introduction to this story. So forgive me if I was, because I knew some of the stuff going into this, but not a lot. Like I was wondering like what the apocalyptic level event was, but obviously it's like, well, it's man-made, of course. So basically it was like war, and basically the planet started getting hot. So scientists decided to, try to cool the planet down, but I guess created a perpetual winter, like basically created a new ice age to a certain extent. And basically some smart person named Wilford ended up building a train that is 1,001 cars. I was like, that was interesting because I never knew this. I knew like basically this train had all of humanity in it, but I didn't know like how you can't really scale that, and you're like, man, this train is 1,001 cars long. That's nuts. Obviously the rich and the powerful were able to kind of get first dibs, so they kind of basically left the rest of humanity just to kind of die. But a lot of those people rose up. I like how they like had the animated opening and then it slid into live action. I thought it was kind of a nice transition. But basically we see like them like jumping aboard. It's not like, the only people, it's basically like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The only people who got a ticket were the people who could probably afford it, like the more rich and powerful people. And, because obviously we have Andre doing the voiceover, and he's talking about the fact is it's the same very people who caused this problem left us here to die. We had to suffer for their mistakes and everything. They don't go into specifics about how long the world's actually been like this. We only find out that they've basically been on a train on Snowpiercer for 6 years, but other than that, we don't know the time frame of, I don't, at least not unless I missed it, but I don't think we know the time frame of like how long exactly this has been going down, like the world being the way it is, kind of frozen over the way it is. Obviously, a lot of people did not make it on a train. A lot of people did, and that kind of plays into like this social class system of the, it's like obviously like the more like social, like majority, like the people out front, like whether it's people who have specific jobs or just people who are rich and were able to get up front, are at the, they're kind of the higher class in the front of the train. But then like you have the tellers, like the tailors, who are just people who are in the tail end of the train, and it's just like they're kind of locked off in their section of that. You stay in the back of the train, because they even kind of get demonized for it. It's like everyone else got here because of a job or they paid for a ticket. You the ones that got aboard like rats, and they get treated like rats. Because when we get introduced to them, their rations have been already cut. Now they're about to be cut again. Because it turns out like, which is also like, we learned a lot of really interesting things. Like for one, it's like, it's been 5 years since there's actually been a child born in a tail, because basically they've sterilized everyone. So it's a thing of like, they get to have as many kids as they want to, but we back here are kind of in that position of like, because I guess in their mind, it's their way of like, because it's so interesting to me, because obviously like as the train was rolling, they weren't afraid of like tossing people out the train, because like that little boy Miles, like his mom in particular got tossed off the train. But it's so interesting, I guess, because there were too many people, and it's a situation of like, no, like they're already aboard the train, we can't do that, like we'll be killing them by doing that. I guess it's like already so much had already been done, so there was nothing that could be done about that. But at this point, because that's why I'm like, why? I mean, because it's also a thing of like, well, I guess they can't disconnect the train either, because it's like, because it's like it's a section of the train that it's like, well, there's tons and tons of people, so that'd be like a mass genocide. But at the same time, maybe it's like, because I doubt they're in like the very, very last car. They do call themselves like Tail One, so I'm like, I guess it's supposed to represent the fact is they were in the very, very like car 1001 and have slowly made their way up, I guess is what that's supposed to represent, I think. Like I said, I could be misinterpreting that. But like, because I obviously a bunch of them later on, or earlier, like Tail One, it's supposed to, I guess that's supposed to represent the group that's been there since Tail One. Like, we've been here, we've made our way through. Because like obviously it's like they've had their revolutions and they've had their attempts, but even like, because even Andre later on, because obviously like the others are saying like, hey, we need to kind of make a move, go to like an electrical system, but Andre's like, we don't know if that electrical system is actually going to do anything. We don't know if it actually affect anything in like the front of the train. Like, who knows if it just affects stuff here? It might not even affect the entire train. Because it's like, we know a few cars around ourselves. So we got a survey of some of the area. We know some of the stuff here and there, but like most of the train is a mystery to us, you know? Because, oh man, was it Devon? Who is the actor who played, once again, Hector and Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul? Because I know he's in Better Call Saul. It's interesting because I most recently saw him a couple weeks ago in an episode of The Blacklist. I thought that was pretty dope. But basically, like, their revolution, like, 3 years ago led to, like, well, I'd say 3 years ago, because it's like, because Jennifer Connelly's character of Melinda, she says it's been, like, 6 years and 9 months. So we're almost a quarter of the way to 7 years. But I thought it was interesting. Like, it's like, oh yeah, we had 65 dead because none of us knew what was in front of us or what to expect, because it's like I said, we know a few cars ahead, but that's about it. Like, everything beyond those doors is mystery to us. And like, because of that, 65 people died, and as retribution, they cut off the arms of 13 people from the tail just to kind of set an example. So, and it seems like Omen Yvonne was one of them. So it's like, ugh. So it creates its interesting situation, because you also have like Andre. He's like, I guess him and Josie are raising the kid Miles. He's like, oh, he's teaching. Oh man, Yvonne is teaching you trigonometry and stuff like that. Good, you'll be an engineer. So I guess the whole thing is, if they get smart enough, like, I guess if they basically, it's a system of like, you prove yourself worthy or useful enough, they'll move you up to a better place. So it's like trying to raise him to be an engineer, because if you're an engineer, they're going to most likely be like, oh, we can use you because you're someone smart, so he'll have a better life. I mean, it's so interesting because it seems like there's a way of them trying to make use of the system while at the same time trying to fight the system. I mean, Andre's all about taking it slow and steady. So maybe getting Miles up there is at the first step of a much greater plan of like, let's slowly kind of figure this out. But obviously they kind of rush things this episode. I also should talk about the fact is, I think it's interesting, there's actually quite a few people with like connections to other comic book like related TV show or properties. I think is interesting. Like, obviously, for example, Jennifer Connelly, it's interesting because obviously the Hulk movie with Eric Bana from like 2003 or 4, the Ang Lee Hulk movie. But aside from that, it's interesting. I didn't know this until maybe a year or so ago. In Spider-Man Homecoming, his AI system that he talks to, Karen, that's Jennifer Connelly. Had no idea. I was like, oh, that's so dope. I had no idea that was her voice. It didn't click in my head. I recognized her voice at the time. But nevertheless, that the actor who played Flesh in Van Helsing, he pops up for a little bit in this episode. I was like, what? That's Phil Flesh. And also, obviously, Stephen Ogg, which is interesting. Well, kind of like thing I best know him as is Trevor from GTA 5, but also like he was Simon in The Walking Dead, one of the saviors. I was like, holy shit, that was kind of interesting. Like I said, just one of those little details. But obviously, like, they were readying up for a fight, but then Andre gets taken, and it's like, okay, so what? And it's so interesting because we get a little bit of a layout to the train, because there's ups and downs. Like, it's not like the trains are just the carts. Like, there are levels to some of them, because like they have almost like a transport system. Like, okay, we got to go down, then we go we drive. I guess it's a fast transportation across the train. Then you have to climb back up. So it's just like it's not just as like simple as you think it is. There is a heavy complexity to the structure of these trains and stuff like that, which I think is train cars, I think is so fascinating, while also being so confined. There's and obviously like him kind of being washed up and open wide, like they're treating him like an animal. It's like, oh yeah, get this rat washed or whatever, so. But then like him seeing, because he opens the door and there's the sunlight, and he kind of goes like that because he covers up his eye. I can't believe I did it. It's like, yeah, this is an audio. Like, I actually put my hands up like, oh, you could see that. Sorry. But never, it's like because they don't get any sunlight back there, so it's like obviously showing you kind of like, and obviously obviously like even just like the color of like the screen and everything, like obviously the clothes they wear is very bland and dark colors. The tail of the train is dark, but then you look at like, oh, like everyone in the upper cars, bright colors, it's bright light. I mean, the lighting is great, but also they get to, look outside. They actually have windows, And so he has a tomato he has a tomato soup, a grilled cheese sandwich. And so the guy he's talking to, I know him from the TV show yesterday. He's popped up in other things, but that's just kind of what I'm blinking on his character's name from yesterday. But that's just kind of the first thing that comes to my mind. But it's a situation of they brought him up here because they found out he's a detective. Because it turns out Andre's like the only detective that's up here. Because it's like, wait, aren't some of these people cops? Is like, no, people that were a part of Wilford's security just happen to have the job, not necessarily police training and stuff like that, which is fascinating. But basically it involves like some dude being sliced up into bits. And I love that dude being like, yeah, I think they cut him up so they could put him in here. And Andre's looking at him, and the dude's like, that's my theory. But what's also interesting is the dude's missing a penis. I was like, that's a statement. So I didn't expect this to be a murder mystery as well. I was like, holy shit, that's interesting. That completely took me by surprise. Once again, I've not seen the movie, so I'm curious, is that true to the movie, or is that something specific they're doing for the TV show? Because I'm also curious, like, how much of like are they adopting from the movie while doing their own thing, and how much might they be taking from the comic book? Because I don't know how much the movie took from the comic book. Like, I don't know. So that's what, I'm just curious, like, what, is being adapted and what's just kind of specific to the TV show. But nevertheless, obviously Andre wants nothing to do with solving this murder. He just wants to go back to detail, because he's like, if I don't, because he wants to go back to detail to prove that he's not a traitor. But they're also like, yeah, you go back there, they're going to slit your throat because they just automatically assume you are one. And it spreads a little bit, because it starts with Pike, Stephen Ogg's character, being like, oh yeah, he's one, but Josie's like, no, he fought. Like, couldn't you tell? It's like, yeah, but the fact is, they came for him specifically. He told us to hold and everything. So, what's also interesting too, like, because Miles is like, oh yeah, like I held all his worldly possessions, and then Josie kind of like, it's like a sad laugh of like, huh, his worldly possessions, and one of them we could tell, like, I guess was like his badge or whatever. But nevertheless, it turns out like this murder is very interesting, because there was actually one 2 years prior. A woman named Nikki was in the drawer. So basically they put you basically in stasis on ice. Basically, I guess that's their way of having. I guess that's their way of going around a prison system. I guess that's their way of kind of like, it's supposed to be like jail. Because if you're awake, you're going to be eating up resources, so it's probably like a way of compensating for like, oh, we don't want people who are on ice. Because that's the thing, like, there's a lot of drawers, but it's like, how many people are actually on ice? We see at least 2 people in this episode that are in the drawers, but it makes you wonder, like, just how many people have been in there over the course of that 6+ years. But it's like, if she's been locked up this entire time, then how? So either we're dealing with a copycat, or they got the wrong person, and it seems like they're kind of leaning more towards the wrong person. They got the wrong person, and obviously Andre gets introduced to Melinda, because Melinda's like the voiceover. She's the one that gives the announcements and stuff like that over the intercoms and stuff like that. She's like, oh yeah, because like they're part of hospitality, they're supposed to be part of like keeping relations good. Like, basically they want to keep everything copacetic, And what's interesting, because that's what I'm curious about, like with Ruth, from The Americans. It's kind of what I know from. I've seen her and other stuff, but The Americans is the thing that comes first. Nevertheless, she went there specifically wearing, it's like, oh, like, go ahead, you get an excuse to wear that fur coat. I know you've been, but I'm like, why do that? Like, because even, I guess maybe it's supposed to kind of be like, oh, look how good, like, keeping up a front of like her wealth and status, is maybe that's what it's supposed to represent. I mean, they are important enough, I guess, but it just seemed weird. Like, why would you wear, I mean, I guess it's because like, well, it makes sense in the grand scheme of things, because it's most likely colder back there in those parts of the train, just because that's probably what that's supposed to represent. I just figured it out for myself, sorry. It's probably most likely that, because it's like, oh, you have an excuse to wear that fur coat you want just because you need a coat because it's colder back there, because they don't have the benefits of heating like we do, so that's most likely what that is. what I also thought was interesting, though, is there's definitely, well, we find out Melinda's been hiding a few things. For one, she visits that actress that she's talking to seems so familiar. I can't place what I know her from. But basically, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna have to get Nikki off of ice, and it's like, oh, will she be? It's like, well, that's because she's gonna be the first person they've taken off ice who's been on ice that long. So, which begs the question, I guess, like a lot of people who might have been guilty have been on a lot longer. I mean, I guess it's kind of like you have to serve your sentences and stuff like that. So I guess maybe that's it. So maybe I'm curious to understand like how that quote unquote justice system kind of works. But the lady she was talking to was like, and if someone starts asking the wrong question, she's like, well, maybe hopefully this investigation will get solved and we can get back to other things. And I was like, that's so interesting. So obviously you're definitely hiding other stuff. So it's like, but you want this investigation because it is like Wilfred wants kind of everything, like I said, copacetic, and this could throw things into chaos, especially if the rich and powerful are like, wait, we're getting murdered. Wait, what? I thought we were safe. What's going on? So they probably hidden the fact is of that murder that took place 2 years ago, this whole Nikki situation. She was probably it's probably a thing of she was a scapegoat. Like they weren't 100% sure, but they were just sure enough to be like, who cares? And there hasn't been any murder since. So it's like, I guess we got it. It's like, oh, now there's another murder. Like crap. So it was more so, she probably more so filled the role of scapegoat, but she's also an eyewitness. There's also the complicated thing of Andre running into Zara, his wife. She's in a section of the train called the Chains that basically, like, apparently took like containers, storage containers, and basically cut them out and kind of made like little homes of them. He's like, yeah, they're kind of weirdos. They kind of like, it's kind of like a very like, I guess, multiple partners type of situation of like, yeah, it's kind of like a sex fueled part of the train. And it turns out, hey, Andre runs into his wife and he says tomato soup and grilled cheese. It's like, she knows those were his favorite. So I guess it's implying like, because obviously she's the one that told them he was a detective, but also it's like, he's like, right, like, of course they know, how would they know to get me exactly what I would want? You told them what to do to kind of make this deal a little more supple. And so he ends up talking to her because basically, because we saw her at the beginning of the series, but that shows, I mean, when they first got on trains, but it's like, she's been going for the past 5 years. Basically, she made her way further up in the train and everything. And obviously for him, it's like, because he's like, I got to get back to the tail. If I don't do this, I won't be able to get back to the tail. She's like, good, you made it. You want your revolution and everything. For him, it's like, yeah, but I don't want to leave the tails behind like you did. But for her, she brings up some interesting things of like, yeah, but I didn't want to be here. Like, you're the one that told me to live because she wanted to die because she's like, I could have been with her family. It's like, it could have been with your brother, all the other people we respected who decided just to die. But you, she's like, I thought, I don't know why I was stupid enough that your position as a cop would have got us into the rich section of the train. And the fact of the matter is, I want nothing to do with the tail. So, and so she's like, yeah, I'm sure, it's like, it's not easy finding love. And he's like, oh, I guess it would be just because apparently you moved. She's like, I bet you and Josie got together the moment I left. He was like, no, actually we didn't. We just survived, so that's not the easiest thing. But that creates this interesting thing of like, oh yeah, your wife isn't there, but she's in a better position than you are because she isn't about the revolution. She just, it's like, I was forced in this situation because of you. I went along with it, but it's like, it's not worth it, the tail. But it's like, I'm in a better position now. I found other people I love and everything. So it's just, it worked out for her, but it's still just, you recognize the thing of like, yeah, that is shitty, but it's just kind of like, well, everyone's aiming to kind of move up, but it's like for, Andre, it's like we move up together type of situation, so. But obviously, like, there's that whole situation with Omen Ibon, that was heartbreaking. Like, the moment he's looking at the pictures and stuff like that, because it's his birthday, he just wants some time alone with the music, and then the moment he pulls out that cord, because the way he was just kind of like sad, I was like, please don't tell me, and he uncharges the phone. I'm like, you're going to kill yourself, aren't you? And they find him, and that's kind of what sparks him of like, we got to do this, because it was his dream to kind of go further. So it's like they start everything, like obviously they use his body as a means of drawing everyone in, pushing forward. Muscle guy, we start slicing and dicing and stabbing. Things get pretty damn bloody. Big muscle dude rips off a dude's hands. The little girl grabs it to open up the door. Security's kind of on the other side, so it's like, if we don't, but then Andre wanting to get back to the tail happens to show up in time. It's like he wants to calm everything down, because the dude in charge is like, oh, he was a dude they ran into at the very beginning, because he's like, oh, I remember you. And Andre's like, oh yeah, I remember you too. So that's definitely going to be an interesting thing of like, I'm sure he's all about kind of exterminating the rats himself, just because of his position and everything. But I just thought it was kind of like a fascinating situation that, Andre has to come back and be like, I'm not a traitor. They want me to solve a murder and everything. And then he has to learn about what happened. And it's like, damn. And it's just like that room is covered in blood. So he's like, the fact of the matter is, if we don't stop this right now, they're going to come in here and they're going to eradicate all of us. So you need to kind of lower your weapons. He's like, I know we've had our differences. Like, I know like things haven't always been good between us. I'm like, I'm wondering what happened in the past that put them at odds, but he's like, you're still my brother. So he's like, but I need you to go in the drawers. It's like going on ice, like, but he's like, because obviously one of the dudes is like, I got a family, I got a wife, I got a kid to look after, so he doesn't want to be dying. But now it's like, okay, like they have to kind of be like sacrificed to a certain extent, to make sure everything's okay, because he's like, we need you up front for this revolution, because eventually we're going to take the engine. So it, like Andre's slowly piecing this all together, like we need to kind of go about things this way if we really want to get control, and obviously for Pike, it's like, it got this bloody. There's this much dead bodies, and all we made it was one car. This was one car. And even Andre had talked, because he had been on tour, like he'd seen at least 131. He's like, they showed me things that we could have never even imagined, because he was in a room where like they were growing stuff, and it's just like, see all this extra food and you can't share any of it. But Melinda kind of puts things in a very interesting perspective of like, obviously it's like, the ecosystem has a perfect balance to it, essentially, that basically you want to be careful about these strawberries because they can pick up a certain fungus that humans could get as well. So it's like almost like this perfect eco balance, and that's kind of what things are too, because it's saying like, this food isn't in surplus, this is enough to serve everyone. It's because it was specifically designed, this whole circumstance was specifically designed to look after the amount of people that were going to be on the train and everything, not the people in the tail and everything, because they're unaccounted, they weren't in the original calculations and stuff like that. But it's still fascinating, but even she's like, for Mr. Wilford, these strawberries are basically more important than you. They matter more than you. So, but like I said, set up some very interesting things. And then I like the twist at the end. I was like, okay, what's up with this whole thing with Melinda? And she's changing clothes and she goes to the front. I'm like, oh, I was like, are you Mr. Wilford's wife or something? It's like, oh no, you are Mr. Wilford. I was like, no, that's an interesting situation. I wasn't expecting that. But then it immediately brings up the question, like, then why the ruse? Like, I mean, I guess it makes sense because, like, the mysterious Mr. Wilford, I guess, like, this way it keeps you it's like you are the architect to this. You are literally the Noah in this arc. You are the architect. And so it's interesting, like, but I guess it's like you want to keep everything, like, you have an order set of your own that you want kind of kept in line. So it's interesting, all that talk she said, was that her just playing the role of like, yeah, like Wilford's supposed to be this imposing figure that's representative. I mean, I'm assuming a lot of the staff knows. I mean, maybe not everyone knows. Maybe only some people know. Home dude that's in the front might be the only person that actually knows that she's Wilford. Maybe no one else does. I don't know. Because it's interesting, because she's also the one making the announcement. So it's like, why put your... I guess it's like, because you don't want to be too above everyone else, I guess. You kind of want to be amongst the people, like you save people. Why kind of exclude yourself from... I don't know, maybe there's something else to that. Which begs the question. Maybe that's what Nikki... It's like, oh, what if they asked her own questions? So like, I'm assuming the other lady, she's the only person that knows the truth about Melinda. I'm assuming, maybe not. Not unless we end up finding out some twist where it's like either she had, like, I'm thinking, like, my brain is like 90% sure she is Mr. Wilford, as they said, but part of me is like, not unless it's a 10% situation where it's like the real Mr. Wilford actually died. They don't want to let anyone know that Mr. Wilford's dead, so she's taking up the mantle of like, oh, like I said, maybe that's the case, but like with all the stuff written down, it makes me seem like, no, it's straight up her, so... that even also makes even more sense why they would want Miles to be an engineer, just because like when they do take the engine, they probably need someone to upkeep it, and it's like him being an engineer studying all this could be, you know, useful in the end. So, but obviously, like I said, Andre, they kind of get everyone to show mercy to the tail. It's like, okay, he's like, I'll solve your murder for you. But it's like eventually they're going to need another arm as, you know, compensation for everything that went down. So, but I'm very interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up going. Like I said, once again, someone who's never seen the movie. Once again, someone who's never read the comic book because he only just found out that it was a comic book fairly recently. I'm digging the aesthetic of the show, and I'm very interested to kind of, you know, I'm a big fan of like kind of like a social class system, because like this kind of heavily reminds me of Altered Carbon a little bit, kind of the murder mystery aspect to it, but also the science fictional angle to it. But even then, it's just, I think it's such a unique situation that I'm really curious, you know, to kind of see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.